With a significant number of Wellington buildings damaged, with Kaikoura cut off, with State Highway 1 impassable along parts of that coastline, and with the main trunk railway line damaged beyond immediate repair, this must encourage us to really plan better for similar events, particularly nearer Wellington and along the Alpine Fault. That's the view of a professor in earthquake engineering at the University of Canterbury. Dr. Brendan Bradley is the Deputy Director of QuakeCore as well. It's a national network of earthquake resilience researchers who say a nation where earthquakes are so common should never be underprepared for them. Of course, lots of people said such things after the Canterbury earthquakes, but Brendan Bradley worries the country has still been caught somewhat flat-footed. And in broad terms, nothing about what has happened this week should have surprised anyone. Resilience is the word, and while lots of people have said it, there is more that can be done to help achieve it.
When the Canterbury earthquakes happened, as devastating as they were, they have led to a strengthening of our civil defence emergency management system.
That was Nikki Kay, still then the Civil Defence Minister, at the New Zealand Symposium on Disaster Risk Reduction in July 2015. She continued,
"This is helping to deliver a stronger and more resilient country. Resilience means being ready to change and having the ability to resist, survive and adapt in the face of adversity and then come back stronger."
By the time Nikki Kay said that, it was a well-worn message. 3 years earlier, in the foreword to a multi-agency document on natural hazards, Earthquake Recovery and EQC Minister Jerry Brownlee had written,
"A key lesson learned in Canterbury is the value in understanding both the likelihood of natural hazard events and the potential impacts and consequences should the event occur."
Resilience was the theme. In that one document, the word resilience was used 17 times. And 3 years later, the Civil Defence Minister was still very much on song.
A key goal of mine is to create better resilience in communities.
To identify the communities where resilience was most likely to be required, you only have to look at volume after volume of civil defence work. And a key document is from April 2010, 6.5 years ago. It picks an earthquake centred under Wellington, so somewhat northeast of Monday's epicentre, but more or less covering the same area. And it predicts
large parts of the Wellington region will be isolated by road.
But perhaps more prescient, in a document with the subtitle Resilient New Zealand, was the prediction that amongst the other areas that would be isolated was Kaikoura. Again, this is from the document.
Major slips, bridge damage and closures are likely on State Highway 1 between Picton and Huranui.
Foretold in writing 6.5 years ago, it was exactly what happened on Monday. So how bad is it, do you think?
Oh, it's bad. Look, I think between Seddon and Cheviot, it's a very bad situation.
That's Transport Minister Simon Bridges on Checkpoint last night, responding to the road closure that Civil Defence predicted 6.5 years ago.
I think the realistic position is it's going to take several months.
And that's earthquakes. Big earthquakes do take months and years to recover from, ask the people of Christchurch. But there has been a sense of scrambling for a plan B in the past few days, as if we'd been caught out by an event we predicted. In other words, we all knew there was a very real chance this was going to happen. Why have we been so caught out by it?
I think the first thing is, look, there's always room for improvement, so let's not have any complacency in this. And I've said already to you that I think actually we do need to, if we can say it like this, and of course none of us wished it happened, but treat this as an opportunity to do a better job on our main network.
Hear, hear, say the people and businesses now cut off, and the scientists who've been exactly predicting this sort of thing for years now. This time we really must use this earthquake as impetus to be better prepared for the next earthquake. More big earthquakes will happen. We all know that.
And so I think what's more important is not to wonder if we're going to have earthquakes, but actually to prepare for them in advance, to make sure that we're quite resilient. And I think these earthquakes have shown that, we can be a lot more resilient than what we are at the moment.
Resilience, there's that word again. But Dr. Brendan Bradley, Professor in Earthquake Engineering at the University of Canterbury, says it's no good just saying it. With earthquakes, resilience must be a state of actual readiness for predictable events.
I'd hate to say, but we can expect them on a much greater scale for the type of earthquakes that people have talked about in the past, the so-called Wellington earthquake and the so-called Alpine fault earthquakes. So now's the time, while it's fresh in everyone's mind, to really learn from these lessons and make sure that we actually implement things to become more resilient.
Yep, resilience is the goal, that's for sure. But what does that mean? First, what do we need to prepare for? Well, Dr. Bradley mentioned the Wellington earthquake and the Alpine fault earthquake. Let's start in the south.
So the Alpine fault itself is particularly long. There's no guarantees, of course, when we have the great Alpine fault earthquake that entire fault will break. Maybe a subsection of that fault could break. We're pretty confident that the two southern passes, the Haas Pass and the Arthurs Pass, will likely be cut off by the type of landslides that we've seen happening along the Kaikoura coast. Depending on how far north the Alpine fault breaks will depend really on how significant the landsliding damage in the Lewis Pass is. The Lewis Pass is the least vulnerable of the three, although I wouldn't say it's any less vulnerable than the Kaikoura coast, so I think that's an indication of the type of landsliding we might see in some of those areas. And of course, once we have those passes closed, there actually isn't a way into the coast. So provisions for access by boat or aerial access obviously become the main thing.
So, as Kaikoura being cut off was predicted, scientists can also tell us that if the Alpine fault earthquake is big enough, we will lose road and rail access to the west coast too, possibly all of it. And Wellington, firstly, Brendan Bradley, what kind of event are we talking about?
We often say magnitude 7.5 to 7.6 is the likely magnitude of a Wellington fault earthquake.
Which is what we had on Monday, but that wasn't directly beneath Wellington. If it was, Wellington too may be totally cut off.
The effect of landslides blocking transportation routes. The construction of the Transmission Gully project is one way to try and alleviate that problem, but I don't think it's a panacea for that issue. And then, of course, we've got the issues where we saw some evidence yesterday of fault rupture, where the two faults come to the surface and we see movement across those faults. So we know that in Wellington, a lot of the bulk water supply crosses the fault in many locations, and we obviously expect when that fault moves side to side, it's going to break those pipes. So lack of water is an issue. So I think really the problems that we're seeing in Kaikoura in terms of remoteness and the difficulty to get access to people and to get goods in and to get people out are the same sort of issues that we're going to face in Wellington.
Once again, we all know this, just as we did with Kaikoura. The question is, are our key lifelines ready to go cohesively whenever the next big one occurs?
I think one big issue that we have, despite our small size, is New Zealand is inherently very fragmented. So we have all of these different national lifelines or networks. So we have Transpower running the electric grid, NZTA running the transportation network, Meridian Energy, Genesis Energy, Mighty River Power, all these different places that all own and operate critical infrastructure, yet none of them talk to each other because they are competitors inherently within our system. And I think for day-to-day business, in terms of attracting customers, that's probably okay. But in terms of thinking about resilience, that's obviously the exact opposite approach from what we need. So I think there's huge issues there for actually the government to develop alignment amongst all these entities, such that, they're all government-owned. It's just that the government's trying to privatise them to make it a little bit, to squeeze the efficiencies out of them. So I think those are probably the main issues. So I think a lot of people focus on individual buildings or individual houses. I really think the big issue is what we call these lifeline networks, the things that provide us our power, sewage, water, telephone, internet, all those kind of things, because they are the things, as the name lifeline suggests, you can't live without.
Dr. Brendan Bradley.